Hi guys! So at the very beginning of this month, I uploaded a video about the Marburg outbreak here in Rwanda and whether or not I was feeling concerned about it. I certainly was at the time. I was certainly feeling a little bit more concerned about it than I was about Mpox or possibly even COVID. But it's now the 19th of October and I wanted to give a little bit of an update because things have actually been going really well so far. So you're probably seeing this a little bit later on because the nature of YouTube is you tend to record in advance and then upload. And I'm uploading a couple of videos at the moment because I'm just about to go on a road trip. So it's currently the 19th of October and we haven't had any new Marburg cases for at least 4 days. The last one was the 14th and I'm recording in the afternoon of the 19th at the moment. So we don't actually know the latest update for today because the updates are released by the Ministry of Health, usually around 10 o'clock in the evening. And if you want to follow those, I'll leave a link below so that you can get the latest updates, as we all do, from the same place. So like I was saying, things are going pretty well here at the moment. Like I said in my video about Mpox, Rwanda has got a really strong outbreak and disease response force. We've got a lot of isolation wards, we've got a lot of protective equipment. We're also very quick at getting into vaccinations, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But although it's been a really fast response and a really effective response, we've still currently got the third highest Marburg outbreak in the historical records that we currently know about. And people have been saying, you know, it's going to be terrible, it's going to be Armageddon. I was certainly a little bit concerned in my last video, but I think it's important to put this into perspective. The largest outbreak ever known was in Angola between 2004 and 2005. There were 374 cases, leading to 329 deaths. And when you see people talking about Marburg online, you often see people saying it has an 88% mortality rate, and that is based on the Angola outbreak. Now, the second largest outbreak was in the DRC, so that's the Democratic Republic of Congo, between 1998 and 2000. So unlike Angola, which was a 1-year outbreak, this one was a 2-year outbreak. And over those 2 years, there were 154 cases and 128 deaths. So an 83% mortality rate, which again is not good. But it's really, really important to remember that the areas in which these outbreaks occurred did not have great medical response, did not have a huge amount of medical facilities, and possibly were not as prepared as certainly Rwanda has been. As I mentioned in my video about Mpox, Rwanda has been preparing for an Ebola outbreak even before COVID came along. In fact, we were totally prepared for Ebola when COVID happened. So we're all a bit taken by surprise because it wasn't the pandemic that we were expecting it to be. So in Rwanda, as of the 18th of October, which was yesterday, the latest statistics show that there have been 62 total confirmed cases. There are currently only 3 people still in treatment. And of those 59 concluded cases, 15 have died and 44 have recovered. So that's a really impressive statistic. You know, we went into this thinking 80 to 88% of people who get this are going to die. And we've seen a much, much lower fatality rate. So WHO, the World Health Organization, count this as CFR, and I don't know what that is because they haven't put it anywhere else in the article, but I think that stands for case fatality rate, and they place that at 24.2%. So if that's the same as the mortality rate, then the mortality rate at the moment is closer to 24% than to 88%, which is a huge win, and mostly in part to Rwanda's extremely quick response and good health facilities for dealing with outbreaks of this kind. Now, just as a layperson, I guess my only kind of criticism was I was finding it difficult to follow the mortality rate clearly. I am not particularly gifted in mathematics, but I was curious about how the statistics were being calculated. I'm going to explain to you what I found difficult about it, and maybe you can chip in below and explain why it's done the way that it's done. Because on the 11th of October, there was was an article that appeared in the New Times. Now, the New Times is the largest newspaper in Rwanda. It's an English language newspaper, and it was reporting that the fatality rate was only 22%. And this confused me a little bit because they must have been working off the latest report from the day before, which was showing that there were 58 confirmed cases, of which there were 30 people in isolation and in treatment, that there had been 13 deaths, and that 15 people had recovered. Now, of course, it took me a bit of a moment here because when I was looking at 13 people had died and 15 had recovered, I couldn't figure out how they'd come to the conclusion that it was only a 22% mortality rate. And then I realised that the reporter, or whoever he got the statistics from, were counting all of the people who were currently in treatment as, I guess, having recovered, because he'd have to have taken the number of people who died against the total number of declared cases, which to me didn't make much sense, because I kept thinking that if you're going to give a mortality rate against a survival rate, then you can only count the concluded cases where you know for certain if somebody has passed away or if somebody has recovered or been discharged. I feel like you can't really factor in the number of people who are still in treatment and assume that they're probably going to recover, when Marburg historically has had above an 80% fatality rate. It's optimistic, and I appreciate that, but it's optimistic perhaps beyond the bounds of realistic. And that was just my thinking, because if you based it at the time on the people who had either died or survived, then you were looking at just roughly a 50-50 chance of survival, a bit higher than a 50-50 chance of survival. But when it was being reported, because it included all of the people who were still in treatment, it looked like it was a 22% fatality rate. So for me, it felt a little bit strange to base the mortality rate on the total number of cases, including the ones that are in treatment, who are just in treatment, who have by definition neither survived it nor not survived it yet. You know what I mean? So I don't know why it's worked out that way instead of based on the concluded cases that we definitely know have run their course. If you are in the health sector, if you work for WHO, if you could explain this to me below, I would really love to know. It's one of those things that I find interesting, and I would just like to know why it's reported that way. From a PR perspective, I can absolutely see why it would be reported that way, because, you know, the difference between saying, oh, it's got a 22% mortality rate compared to, oh, you've only got a 50-50 chance, I can totally see why you would rather play down the mortality rate. But I don't know if there is another reason for that beyond just preventing public panic. So I thought maybe that the journalist had made a mistake in the calculation there, but then when I went to look at the World Health Organization statistics, they're calculating it in exactly the same way. So they're taking into account the total number of cases, not the total number of concluded cases. But what's very, very interesting is, as of yesterday, there are currently only 3 unresolved cases right now, and the vast majority of people have recovered. And when you calculate it, it's round about a 25% mortality rate when you're only looking at the concluded cases. So that is actually very, very close to the 24% that the World Health Organization are saying when they include the total number of cases, if that makes sense. So all in all, it's creeping very, very close to that original 22% mortality rate. Sorry if that's convoluted. Explain to me the error of my thinking. Convince me I'm wrong to only be taking concluded cases into account here. So moving on from all of that, yes, Rwanda has got the 3rd largest outbreak of Marburg that we know of. But at the same point, when you consider the rates of infection here compared to what they were in Angola and even in DRC, it is still a very small outbreak. And that is not to denigrate in any way the people who have lost their lives, because, you know, nobody should have to die from this. It's a hideous, hideous disease. But if we're purely looking at numbers, it's gone well. And another way to put it into perspective is to look at it alongside COVID. So 1 year ago, October last year, was when the final death toll was really posted for the number of people who died from COVID in Rwanda, and it was 1,469. Now, COVID has a much lower infection rate, and yet it's still managed to kill far more people than Marburg has. So when we're looking at the scale of these diseases, I think Marburg has been very well contained and has caused a lot less damage than we were expecting it to so far. And like I say, I'm uploading this a few days before you're going to be seeing it, so hopefully the world hasn't caught fire before then. If there have been any major updates between me uploading this and you watching this, I will leave it in the comments below. So just to wrap up, there's a couple of extra steps that are being taken to contain and eliminate this virus. And the first one worth mentioning is the vaccine drive. So there's the Sabine Vaccine Institute in America, and the moment that this kicked off, they sent over a whole shipment of Marburg vaccine. Now, it's worth mentioning that at the moment, I don't think that there is a single fully approved Marburg vaccine that has been through all stages of clinical testing. I believe there are 4 stages of clinical testing. And at the moment, when this all kicked off, the Sabine vaccine was at stage 2. So from what I understand, the first stage of testing is to make sure that it doesn't cause, obvious physical harm, to see how the body reacts to it and to see what the side effects might be. The second round is to test it on a wider sample group of people. Now, usually, of course, this would be done over time within a controlled medical facility. In the UK, I think since the beginning of this year, they were actually calling out for volunteers to go and be part of a clinical Marburg vaccination trial. I'll leave that information below or on the screen somewhere. So I think that might be an example of a stage 2 trial where they're rolling it out to more people who have given informed consent to be part of a medical trial and who are being very closely monitored under scientific conditions. But there is something called the accelerated development pathway for testing drugs, which is literally what this situation is. And it was used with the Ebola vaccine before, is if there is a sudden outbreak of, a very serious disease in a given region, that there can be emergency approval given to ship it out and to, test it in a monitored environment with a larger number of people. Obviously, it's not ideal, but let's put it this way. If you are a frontline health worker and you are working in a facility where you know that there is the Marburg virus and that you may come into contact with it, would you rather go in there without a vaccine or go in there with a vaccine? And it's not like this is completely untested. It's been through phase 1 of the trials to show that it isn't harmful to humans or the majority of humans as far as we know. And so, it's not just somebody going, oh, I wonder what this does. Boom, it has been through testing. And so really they're just using this as a chance to test it on more people who would be vulnerable if they hadn't had access to it. So they're just using this situation as a chance to accelerate stage 2 testing, from what I understand. It would have been tested on a larger number of people anyway. It's just being tested on a larger number of people now here, because this is where the biggest threat and the biggest danger and the biggest potential loss of life is. Hopefully we will have a fully approved vaccine at some point in the future, and this will probably have helped to lead towards that. Now, the second containment approach that's being used is if you are visiting Rwanda. So if you're a tourist or you're here for business and then you're leaving Rwanda again, you now need to fill out a travel survey. I'll leave the details of that below, and it just asks you some health questions so that they can track you once you've left Rwanda. So if there's any possibility that there's an outbreak anywhere else in the world, they can quickly check to see whether or not anybody involved in that outbreak has come from Rwanda. But as well, if you have been in contact with somebody with Marburg, or if you are a close relation or close contact, you're not allowed to travel for at least 21 days after contact with them. So that gives it time to show itself. So it's quite a useful tracking system. It's what you would expect to see in a situation like this. So you can't just come here, be in contact with somebody with Marburg and leave again. Also, they can track you really, really quickly if you have been in contact with somebody who wasn't symptomatic at the time. So I think those are really, really good steps forward. I mean, it's clearly working. Whatever they're doing is clearly working very well. And yeah, the cases have really fallen off, and the majority of people who've had it have now survived it. So it's really nice to be making this update, especially after my slightly concerned initial post earlier this month. And yeah, it's really good news so far. I think it was just very concerning because of the way that this particular virus attacks you. It is a particularly unpleasant one. The symptoms are awful. And, you know, at that time, we still thought that it had around an 80% mortality rate. So people were very, very concerned. You know, a lot of events have been called off, a lot of restrictions have been placed on group gatherings, especially for funerals and things like that. So it's good to see that, you know, the need for that level of panic has now greatly reduced. So yeah, stay safe out there, stay sanitized and hygienic, and yeah, back to business as usual, I think.